A father chained his only daughter inside a cursed house for 16 years, beating her night after night to stop an evil no one believed existed. But when the girl finally broke free during a violent storm, an ancient darkness awakened, and the entire village discovered the horrifying truth too late. Dark Lantern Stories welcomes you tonight. Tell us your city, country, and the time you are watching from. If you love dark, emotional, and shocking true-style stories, subscribe now and like this video so you never miss another unforgettable tale. Tonight's story begins with a father, a daughter, and a secret buried beneath fear, silence, and blood. What happened inside that lonely wooden house shocked an entire town, but the truth was even darker than anyone imagined. Part 1. The rain started before sunset. Thick clouds rolled across the small farming village of Hollow Creek, swallowing the sky in darkness long before night arrived. People rushed inside their homes, locking doors and covering windows. The villagers hated storms. They believed terrible things moved through Hollow Creek whenever thunder shook the hills. At the edge of the village stood a broken house beside a dying cornfield. The wood was old, blackened by years of rain and smoke. The roof leaned dangerously to one side, and every window was covered with dirty cloth. Children passing the road never looked directly at the house. Adults lowered their voices whenever they spoke about the man living there. His name was Ezekiel Thorne. Tall, silent, and feared. He rarely smiled. He rarely spoke. People said grief had turned his heart into stone many years ago after his wife died during childbirth. Others whispered darker stories. Some claimed they heard screaming from the house late at night. Others swore they saw strange markings painted around the property in animal blood, but nobody ever went close enough to confirm anything. Ezekiel lived alone with his daughter, Clara. She was 16 years old, pale skin, long dark hair, and eyes that always looked frightened. The villagers barely saw her. She never attended gatherings, never laughed with other girls, never walked freely through town. Whenever Ezekiel brought her to the market, she kept her head down and spoke to nobody. One evening, old Martha Bell watched Clara carefully while selling vegetables at the market. Martha noticed bruises around the girl's wrists. Fresh bruises, dark purple. Clara quickly pulled her sleeves down after realizing Martha had seen them. Martha leaned closer and whispered, "Child, are you safe in that house?" Clara froze. Her lips trembled. For 1 second, it looked like she wanted to answer. Then Ezekiel suddenly appeared beside her. His cold eyes locked onto Martha. "Mind your business," he said quietly. Martha felt ice crawl through her chest. Ezekiel grabbed Clara's arm and dragged her away. That night, Martha could not sleep. Thunder crashed outside while she sat beside her candle, thinking about the terror inside Clara's eyes. Something terrible was happening inside that house. She felt certain of it. But Hollow Creek feared Ezekiel too much to interfere. Days passed, then weeks. Rumors spread like wildfire after strange sounds echoed across the village one night. Screaming, loud screaming. Some villagers claimed it sounded like Clara begging for mercy. Others heard heavy pounding noises, like someone smashing wet meat with a hammer. Yet nobody investigated. Fear kept every door locked. The next morning, Ezekiel appeared in town alone. His clothes were stained with mud. His hands looked scratched and swollen. Clara was nowhere to be seen. Martha approached carefully. "Where is your daughter?" Ezekiel stared at her without emotion. "She is sick. Maybe she needs a doctor." "She needs nobody." His voice carried something unnatural that made Martha step back immediately. Ezekiel purchased supplies and disappeared into the rain once more. But the village could not ignore the growing fear any longer. 3 days passed without anyone seeing Clara. Then little Tommy Rivers claimed he saw something horrifying near Ezekiel's barn late at night. The boy told his mother he saw Ezekiel digging behind the house while carrying what looked like a blood-covered blanket. The villagers gathered inside the church the next morning. Fear spread through every whispered conversation. Pastor Hale stood before them, nervous and pale. "We cannot accuse a man without proof," he said. Martha slammed her hand against the bench. Proof? That poor girl may be dead already. Another man spoke quietly. What if Ezekiel hears we are talking about him? Silence filled the church immediately. Everyone feared the same thing. Ezekiel Thorne was not an ordinary man. Strange things followed him. Animals died whenever he passed nearby. Crops failed around his property. Even the air near his house felt wrong. But Martha refused to stay silent any longer. If nobody else will check on Clara, I will. Nobody volunteered to join her, not even Pastor Hale. As evening approached, Martha wrapped herself in a thick coat and walked toward the Thorne property alone. Rain dripped from dead trees while thunder rumbled overhead. Every step toward the house made her heart pound harder. She noticed something strange immediately. The front door stood open, slowly moving in the wind. Martha called softly, "Clara?" No answer. She stepped inside. The smell hit her first. Rot, blood, something foul enough to make her gag instantly. The inside of the house looked worse than anyone imagined. Broken furniture covered the floor. Strange symbols painted the walls in black ash. Candles melted across every surface. Martha moved carefully through the darkness until she heard faint crying upstairs. A girl crying, weak, barely alive. Martha rushed toward the staircase, then froze halfway up. There were bloodstains everywhere, thick stains leading toward a locked door at the end of the hall. The crying came from behind it. Martha approached slowly. "Clara, child, are you in there?" A weak voice answered. "Help me." Martha grabbed the handle, locked. She searched nearby and found a heavy iron tool leaning against the wall. With trembling hands, she smashed the lock open. The door burst inward. Martha screamed. Clara lay chained to the floor. Her body was covered in bruises and cuts. One eye swollen shut, her breathing weak. Beside her sat a massive wooden-pounding mallet stained dark red. Martha nearly collapsed from horror. Clara reached toward her weakly. "He said I ruined everything," she whispered. "He said the darkness inside me must be beaten out before the next moon." Martha rushed forward to free her chains. "We are leaving now." But Clara grabbed her wrist tightly. "No, he will come back." Suddenly, thunder exploded outside. Heavy footsteps echoed downstairs. Ezekiel had returned. Martha's blood turned cold instantly. Clara started shaking violently. "Hide," she whispered desperately. But it was too late. Slow footsteps climbed the staircase. Each step creaked louder, closer. Martha looked around frantically for escape, but the room had no window large enough. Then Ezekiel appeared in the doorway. Rain dripped from his coat while his eyes locked onto Martha without surprise, almost like he expected her. "You should not have come here," he said calmly. Martha stood protectively before Clara. "You monster," Ezekiel sighed heavily. "You do not understand." "I understand enough. That poor girl needs help." Ezekiel stepped closer. "She carries evil inside her." Martha spat angrily. "You are the evil?" For the first time, Ezekiel's face twisted with rage. He raised the bloody wooden mallet slowly. Clara screamed. Martha backed away in terror as Ezekiel entered the room fully. "I tried to save her," he whispered, "but the darkness keeps growing." Suddenly, Clara shouted, "Run!" The candles inside the room exploded at once. Fire burst across the walls unnaturally fast. Martha gasped as icy wind roared through the room, though every window remained closed. Then something impossible happened. The chains around Clara snapped by themselves. Ezekiel froze. Fear flashed across his face for the first time. Clara slowly stood. Blood ran down her arms while shadows twisted unnaturally around her body. Her voice changed, deeper, colder. "You should have let me die years ago," she said. The entire house began shaking violently. Martha stumbled backward while Ezekiel tightened his grip on the mallet. "No," he whispered. "Not again." Clara lifted her head slowly. Both eyes had turned completely black. Outside, Every dog in Hollow Creek began howling at once, and deep beneath the floorboards of the Thorn House, something began knocking from underground. The knocking beneath the floorboards grew louder with every second. Boom, boom, boom. Each strike shook dust from the ceiling while the walls groaned like an old ship trapped in a storm. Martha backed against the doorway, unable to breathe properly. Clara stood motionless in the center of the burning room, her dark eyes fixed on Ezekiel. The fire spreading around them did not touch her skin. It moved strangely, curling around her body like living snakes. Ezekiel's hands trembled on the bloody mallet. The fear in his face shocked Martha more than the supernatural horror surrounding them. This was a man the entire village feared, yet now he looked terrified of his own daughter. "Clara," he whispered carefully. "Fight it." Clara tilted her head slowly. Her voice no longer sounded human. "You spent 16 years trying to crush me." Boom! The floor beneath them cracked slightly. Martha looked down and saw something moving under the wood. Not rats, not insects. Fingers, human fingers pushing upward from beneath the floorboards. Martha screamed and stumbled back. Ezekiel stepped forward immediately. "Get out of this house," he shouted at Martha. "Now." Martha grabbed Clara's arm desperately. "Come with me." Clara's black eyes shifted toward Martha for one brief moment. Her expression softened slightly, like the real Clara was still buried somewhere inside. Then another violent knock shook the floor. Boom! Several boards exploded upward. Rotten hands burst through the opening, clawing wildly at the air. Martha nearly fainted. Gray skin, long broken nails, dead flesh. More hands emerged from the darkness below. Ezekiel raised the mallet and slammed it downward onto one of the hands with brutal force. Bones snapped loudly. Black liquid splashed across the floor. The creature beneath released an awful scream that sounded half human, half animal. "Go!" Ezekiel roared again. Martha finally moved. She grabbed Clara's wrist and pulled hard toward the staircase. At first, Clara resisted. Her body remained stiff and unnatural. Then suddenly, she collapsed weakly against Martha like all her strength had vanished. Her eyes returned to normal for 1 second. "Please," Clara whispered weakly, "do not leave me with him." Martha wrapped an arm around her and hurried downstairs as the house shook violently around them. Behind them, Ezekiel continued smashing the creatures climbing through the floor. Terrible screams echoed through the burning hallway. Martha reached the front door and pushed it open. Rain poured heavily outside. She dragged Clara into the muddy yard while lightning split the sky overhead. Halfway across the property, Clara suddenly stopped moving. Martha pulled harder. "Come on." Clara stared toward the barn with horror. "It is awake." Martha followed her gaze. The barn doors slowly creaked open by themselves. Darkness filled the inside completely. Then something massive shifted within the shadows. Something breathing heavily. Martha's stomach tightened. "What is in there?" Clara began shaking violently again. "My mother." Lightning flashed. For one horrifying second, Martha saw a huge shape standing inside the barn. Tall, twisted, human, yet not human anymore. Then darkness swallowed it again. Martha dragged Clara toward the road as fast as possible. Behind them, the Thorn House exploded with crashing sounds. Windows shattered outward. Black smoke rose into the stormy sky. Suddenly, Ezekiel burst from the house covered in blood. He ran toward them carrying the mallet. Martha screamed and shielded Clara instinctively, but Ezekiel ignored them completely. His eyes remained locked on the barn. "It cannot leave the property," he muttered desperately. "Not before sunrise." The ground beneath the barn began trembling. Then the entire structure shook violently as deep growling echoed from inside. Wood splintered outward. Martha stared in horror. "What did you do?" Ezekiel looked at her with exhausted eyes filled with years of guilt. 16 years ago, my wife died giving birth to Clara." Another loud crash interrupted him. The barn doors burst fully open. The creature stepped outside slowly. Martha nearly collapsed. It wore the shape of a woman, but the body looked stretched, unnaturally tall and thin. Bones pushed against gray skin. Long black hair dragged through the mud. Its mouth hung open too wide, revealing rows of broken teeth. Worst of all were the eyes. Empty black holes leaking thick, dark liquid. Clara buried her face against Martha's shoulder. "Mother," she whispered fearfully. The creature turned its head sharply toward Clara after hearing the word. Its body twisted with loud cracking sounds. Ezekiel stepped forward, holding the mallet tightly. "Stay behind me," Martha shouted angrily. "Tell us the truth." Ezekiel stared at the creature while rain poured down his face. "My wife Eleanor practiced things she should never have touched. Ancient rituals, dark prayers. She believed she could speak to the dead." The creature released a low growl that vibrated through the ground itself. When Clara was born, something came back with her from the other side. Martha felt sick. "You are lying." "I wish I was." Ezekiel's voice cracked painfully. Eleanor changed after the birth. She stopped eating, stopped sleeping. She locked herself inside that barn every night. Then one evening, I found her feeding on dead animals. Martha covered her mouth in horror. Ezekiel continued. "She begged me to kill her before the darkness fully consumed her. I could not do it." The creature suddenly lunged forward with terrifying speed. Ezekiel swung the mallet hard against its skull. A loud crack echoed through the yard. But instead of falling, the creature grabbed Ezekiel by the throat and lifted him into the air effortlessly. Martha screamed. Clara cried out desperately. The creature opened its mouth wider and wider until the jaw split unnaturally down both sides. A horrible shrieking sound burst from inside. Blood exploded from Ezekiel's ears as he struggled helplessly. Clara suddenly pushed away from Martha. "Stop!" The creature froze instantly. Slowly, its head turned toward Clara. The rain seemed to stop around them for one unnatural moment. Clara stepped closer despite Martha begging her not to. Tears streamed down Clara's bruised face. "Mother," she whispered again. The creature released Ezekiel violently. He crashed into the mud, gasping for breath. Then the creature crawled toward Clara slowly on all fours like a giant spider. Martha wanted to run, but fear rooted her feet to the ground. Clara knelt before the monster, trembling. "Why are you doing this?" she whispered. The creature reached out with long, shaking fingers and touched Clara's cheek gently. For one heartbreaking moment, it almost looked human again, a mother touching her child lovingly. Then the creature spoke in a broken, raspy voice. "Hungry." Clara began crying harder. Ezekiel forced himself up painfully. "Get away from it." But Clara shook her head. "She is suffering." The creature suddenly grabbed Clara's wrist tightly. Martha saw black veins spreading instantly beneath Clara's skin from the touch. Clara screamed in agony. Ezekiel charged forward and struck the creature again and again with the mallet. Bones cracked loudly. Black blood sprayed across the mud. The creature released Clara with an enraged shriek powerful enough to shatter nearby windows. Then it attacked Ezekiel savagely. Martha pulled Clara backward while the monster slammed Ezekiel against the ground repeatedly. Each impact sounded like bones breaking. Clara cried desperately, "Stop hurting him." The creature paused, its empty eyes fixed on Clara again. Slowly, it stood upright. Ezekiel lay motionless in the mud, coughing blood. Clara suddenly stepped forward with strange calmness. "This is my fault," she whispered. Martha grabbed her arm. "No." Clara looked at her sadly. "The darkness wants me. That is why he kept hurting me. Father believed pain weakened it." Martha stared at Ezekiel with disgust and horror. Clara continued quietly, but it only made it stronger. The creature began moving toward Clara again. Behind them, lights appeared along the distant road. Villagers carrying lanterns approached through the storm. Pastor Hale led them cautiously. Martha shouted desperately, "Stay back!" But it was too late. The creature noticed them instantly. Its body twisted unnaturally as it released a scream filled with pure hunger. Then it sprinted toward the villagers at impossible speed. Panic exploded across the road. Men dropped lanterns while women screamed. Pastor Hale froze in terror as the creature reached him first. Its claws tore through his chest before anyone could react. Blood sprayed across the rain-soaked ground. Chaos consumed Hollow Creek. Villagers ran in every direction while the creature attacked wildly. Clara collapsed to her knees, sobbing. "I did this." Ezekiel forced himself upright painfully. Blood covered his face. He looked toward Clara with deep regret. "No," he whispered. "I did." Martha stared at him furiously. "You tortured your own child." Ezekiel's eyes filled with tears for the first time. Because every time the darkness grew stronger, people died. Another scream echoed from the village road. The creature dragged a man into the darkness violently while others fled. Ezekiel gripped the bloody mallet tighter. There is only one way to stop it now. Clara looked up slowly. What way? Ezekiel stared directly into her eyes. His face looked completely broken. It came through you. Clara's expression filled with horror as she realized what he meant. Martha stepped protectively before her instantly. "You stay away from that girl." But Ezekiel whispered something that made Martha's blood freeze completely. "If Clara dies before sunrise, the darkness dies with her." Martha stared at Ezekiel as thunder rolled across Hollow Creek. Rain soaked the ground around them while screams echoed from the village road. For several seconds, nobody moved. Clara's face turned pale with horror. "You want to kill me?" she whispered. Ezekiel looked away. His grip tightened around the blood mallet. "I never wanted this." Martha stepped between them immediately. "You stay back." Another terrified scream ripped through the darkness. The creature was still hunting villagers near the church. Lanterns flickered wildly through the storm while people ran for their lives. Clara wiped tears from her bruised face. Her entire body shook violently. "All these years," she whispered, staring at her father, "you were waiting for the right moment to murder me." Ezekiel's expression cracked painfully. "I was trying to save everyone." "By beating me," Clara shouted. "By chaining me like an animal?" Her voice broke into sobs. "I was your daughter." Ezekiel opened his mouth to answer, but no words came out. Deep guilt filled his eyes. Martha pulled Clara closer protectively. "We are leaving this place." But Ezekiel suddenly grabbed Martha's arm hard enough to hurt. "You do not understand what happens if she survives until the next moon." Martha shoved him away angrily. "You are insane." Ezekiel pointed toward the village where flames were beginning to rise through the rain. "Look," Martha turned. The creature moved through Hollow Creek like death itself. Villagers fled between houses while the monstrous woman hunted them with terrifying speed. One man tried to fight back using a shotgun, but the creature ripped his arm away before he could fire again. Blood sprayed across the muddy street. Clara screamed and covered her ears. Ezekiel spoke quietly. "That thing was once my wife. Every year it grows stronger. Every year more people die." Martha looked at Clara. "Then why is this happening now?" Ezekiel hesitated. Fear crossed his face. "Because Clara turns 17 tomorrow night." Silence filled the rain-soaked yard. Clara stared at him in confusion. "What does that mean?" Ezekiel looked toward the dark sky. Eleanor believed she could open a door between life and death permanently. She performed rituals while carrying you inside her womb. Martha felt sick listening to him. She said the child born from the ritual would become a bridge, a living doorway. Clara backed away slowly. "No," Ezekiel nodded weakly. "I tried to stop her, but by the time I learned the truth, it was already too late." Another loud scream echoed nearby. The creature crashed through the windows of the general store while terrified people scattered through the streets. Hollow Creek had become a nightmare. Clara suddenly turned and ran toward the road. Martha shouted after her, "Clara!" Ezekiel cursed under his breath and chased after them both. Rain blinded their vision as they sprinted through the muddy path toward town. Clara moved desperately, ignoring the pain in her battered body. Martha struggled to keep up. When they reached the village square, horror surrounded them. Dead bodies lay across the street. Broken carts burned beside overturned lanterns. Villagers cried and prayed while hiding inside buildings. The creature stood near the church steps, feeding on something in the darkness. Wet, tearing sounds echoed through the storm. Clara froze in shock. Pastor Hale's lifeless body lay nearby with half his chest missing. Ezekiel grabbed Clara's shoulders roughly. "Listen to me carefully. We can still end this before midnight." Clara slapped his hands away violently. "Do not touch me." Her voice carried years of buried pain. Martha stepped closer to Clara protectively. There must be another way. Ezekiel looked exhausted beyond words. "I searched for 16 years. Suddenly, the creature lifted its head sharply. Black liquid dripped from its mouth while its empty eyes fixed directly on Clara. The moment felt unnatural, like some invisible connection existed between them. The creature released a deep growl. Then it began walking toward Clara slowly. Villagers hiding nearby screamed terror and fled again. Clara remained frozen. Martha pulled at her arm desperately. "Run!" But Clara whispered softly, "She knows me." The creature stopped only a few feet away. Up close, it looked even more horrifying. Pieces of skin hung loosely from its body. Bones cracked beneath every movement. Yet hidden inside the monster, Martha could still see traces of a woman. A mother destroyed by something evil. Clara stepped closer despite Martha's protests. Tears streamed down her face. "Mother?" The creature twitched violently after hearing the word. Its mouth opened slowly. "Cold," it whispered painfully. Clara cried harder. "I can help you." Ezekiel shouted furiously. "No!" The creature suddenly lunged forward with impossible speed. Martha screamed, but instead of attacking Clara, the creature wrapped its arms around her tightly. Both of them collapsed into the mud together. Then something horrifying happened. Thick black smoke began pouring from the creature's mouth directly into Clara's body. Clara screamed in agony. Her veins turned dark beneath her skin instantly. Ezekiel charged forward, roaring with rage. He swung the mallet hard against the creature's spine. A loud crack echoed across the square. The creature shrieked and released Clara immediately. Martha dragged Clara backward while Ezekiel continued attacking the monster wildly. Blow after blow smashed into its body with sickening force, but the creature only grew more violent. It grabbed Ezekiel by the leg and hurled him through the church doors. Wood exploded everywhere. Clara gasped painfully on the ground. Her eyes flickered strangely between normal and black. Martha knelt beside her. "Stay with me." Clara grabbed Martha's wrist tightly. Her skin felt freezing cold. "It is inside me now." Martha shook her head desperately. "No." Clara suddenly looked toward the church. Fear filled her face. He cannot stop her anymore. A massive crash exploded from inside the church. Ezekiel flew backward through shattered doors covered in blood. The creature crawled after him across the walls and ceiling like a giant insect. Villagers screamed from nearby houses. Clara forced herself up weakly. "I have to end this." Martha blocked her path. "You hurt him. He wants you dead." Clara looked broken beyond words. "Maybe he is right." Martha grabbed her face firmly. "Listen to me. You are not evil." Clara's lips trembled. "Then why does death follow me everywhere?" Before Martha could answer, old Martha Bell heard crying nearby. A little girl stood alone beside the burning general store, maybe 6 years old, terrified and trapped. The creature noticed her too. Instantly, it sprinted toward the child. Martha shouted. Clara moved faster. Despite her injuries, she threw herself between the creature and the little girl just as the monster attacked. The impact sent Clara crashing hard against the street. The creature raised its claws again. But Clara suddenly screamed with unnatural power. Every lantern around the square exploded at once. A shockwave blasted outward violently. Windows shattered, flames bent sideways. Even the rain seemed pushed back for one impossible moment. The creature flew backward across the square and smashed into a wagon. Silence followed. Everyone stared at Clara in horror. She slowly stood. Black veins spread farther across her neck now. Her eyes flickered dark again. The little girl ran crying into her mother's arms. Clara looked down at her own shaking hands. "I felt it," she whispered fearfully. "The darkness." Ezekiel coughed blood while forcing himself upright near the church steps. "It grows stronger every minute." Clara looked at him through tears. "Then teach me how to stop it without killing me." Ezekiel froze. Martha saw conflict tear across his face. For 16 years, he believed death was the only answer. Now doubt appeared for the first time. Suddenly, the church bell began ringing by itself. Loud, violent. Everyone turned toward the church tower slowly. No one stood near the bell rope. Yet the bell continued ringing through the storm. Boom, boom, boom. Clara's breathing quickened. Something is coming. The creature also sensed it. It backed away slowly while growling toward the church tower. Fear entered its empty eyes. Then the church doors creaked open by themselves. Darkness waited inside. A cold wind swept through the square, carrying whispers nobody could understand. Ezekiel's face lost all color. "Impossible." Martha looked at him. "What?" Ezekiel whispered in terror. "The door." From inside the church, shadowy figures began emerging slowly. Human shapes made entirely from darkness. Their eyes glowed faintly white as they drifted across the floor unnaturally. More shapes followed behind them. Dozens, maybe hundreds. Villagers screamed and ran again. Clara stared at the shadows in horror while black veins spread farther across her skin. One shadow figure pointed directly at her. Then all of them began moving toward her together. Ezekiel dropped the mallet. His voice trembled with hopelessness. "We are too late." The shadow figures poured from the church like black smoke given human form. They drifted across the flooded streets silently, their glowing white eyes fixed only on Clara. Villagers ran screaming through Hollow Creek while thunder cracked above them. Some fell into the mud in panic. Others locked themselves inside their homes, praying the doors would somehow keep evil away. But the shadows ignored everyone except Clara. Martha grabbed Clara's arm tightly. "We have to move." Clara could barely breathe. The black veins beneath her skin had spread across her neck now, twisting like living worms under flesh. Every heartbeat sent pain through her body. She stared at the approaching shadows in horror. "They are calling me." Ezekiel forced himself upright near the broken church steps. Blood poured from a deep wound across his forehead. He looked years older than before, like the weight of 16 years had finally crushed him completely. "The doorway is opening," he whispered. Martha shouted at him angrily. "Then close it." Ezekiel looked toward Clara with unbearable sadness. "I do not know how." The creature that had once been Eleanor crouched beside an overturned wagon, growling nervously at the shadows. For the first time, it seemed afraid. The monsters slowly backed away from the church while the shadows continued spreading across the village square. Clara stared at the creature. Even she fears them. Ezekiel nodded weakly. Because they are not trapped souls anymore. Another shadow emerged from the church doorway, taller than the others. Its shape twisted unnaturally, arms too long, head bent sideways. A horrible whispering sound followed it everywhere. Martha covered her ears immediately. The whisper sounded like hundreds of voices speaking at once beneath water. Clara suddenly gasped and clutched her chest. "They are inside my head." The tall shadow lifted one long finger and pointed directly toward Clara. Instantly, every smaller shadow rushed forward together. Martha screamed, "Run!" Clara, Martha, and Ezekiel sprinted through the rain-soaked streets while shadows chased them silently. The creatures moved unnaturally fast, gliding across walls, rooftops, and flooded ground without sound. Villagers hiding nearby watched in terror from windows and doorways. One shadow suddenly reached an old man too slow to escape. The creature touched his face gently. The man immediately collapsed lifeless into the mud while dark smoke poured from his mouth. Martha nearly froze in horror. "What are they?" Ezekiel answered while running painfully beside them. "Hungry." Clara stumbled weakly. Her body grew colder every minute. "Where are we going?" Ezekiel pointed toward the forest beyond Hollow Creek. "There is one place the darkness fears." Martha looked shocked. "You had 16 years to mention this." Ezekiel's face twisted with shame. "Because I swore never to return there again." Behind them, the shadows continued spreading through the village. Houses darkened as creatures slipped inside through cracks and broken windows. Screaming echoed everywhere now. Hollow Creek was dying. Clara looked back with tears in her eyes. "They are killing everyone." Ezekiel grabbed her wrist firmly. "If they fully cross over tonight, they will not stop with this village." The rain intensified as they reached the forest path outside Hollow Creek. Dead trees swayed violently overhead. The deeper they ran into the woods, the colder the air became. Clara's breathing grew uneven. Several times she nearly collapsed. Martha supported her carefully. "Stay strong," Clara whispered painfully. "I do not think I can." Suddenly, the creature that had once been Eleanor appeared ahead of them between the trees. Martha screamed and stepped back. The monster blocked the path completely. Its empty eyes focused on Clara with desperate hunger. Ezekiel raised the mallet again despite exhaustion. "Stay behind me." But Eleanor did not attack immediately. Instead, the creature stared at Clara almost mournfully. Rain dripped from its twisted body while strange sounds escaped its throat. Clara slowly stepped forward despite Martha begging her not to. "Mother?" The creature twitched violently. One skeletal hand reached toward Clara slowly. Then in a broken voice, barely human anymore, it whispered, "Run." Everyone froze. The creature suddenly turned its head sharply toward the darkness behind them. The shadows were approaching through the forest now. Dozens of glowing white eyes moved between the trees. Eleanor released a furious scream and charged directly toward them. The collision shook the forest. Shadow creatures swarmed over Eleanor instantly like insects. The monster tore through several shadows with savage claws, ripping them apart into black smoke. But more kept coming. Clara cried out, "She is protecting us." Ezekiel stared in disbelief. Martha pulled Clara backward. "We have to go." Clara hesitated, tears pouring down her face. "She is still in there." Eleanor continued fighting desperately behind them while the shadows consumed the forest. Her screams echoed horribly through the rain. Ezekiel finally whispered something Martha never expected. "Your mother loved you." Clara looked at him sharply. "Then why did you lock her away?" Ezekiel's voice broke. "Because she begged me to." Silence passed between them except for distant screams and thunder. They continued deeper into the woods until an old stone structure appeared through the rain ahead. A church ruin, ancient and forgotten. Moss covered cracked walls. The roof had collapsed years ago. Strange symbols were carved around the doorway. Martha slowed nervously. "What is this place?" Ezekiel stared at the ruins with visible fear. "This is where Eleanor learned the rituals." Clara looked horrified. "You brought us here?" "This place existed long before Hollow Creek. The villagers avoided it for centuries." Ezekiel stepped inside carefully. "But there may still be answers hidden here." Lightning flashed overhead as they entered the ruined church. The air inside felt unnaturally cold. Old candles and strange markings covered the walls. In the center of the floor sat a massive circle painted in faded black symbols. Clara suddenly stopped walking. Her eyes widened with fear. "I have seen this place before." Martha looked confused. "How?" Clara touched her forehead painfully. "In dreams." Ezekiel stared at her uneasily. What dreams? Clara looked around the ruins, trembling. A woman in black robes brought Mother here before I was born. They spoke to something beneath the ground. Thunder exploded outside, then came screaming from the forest. Eleanor's screams suddenly stopped. Silence followed. Martha felt dread crawl through her chest. Ezekiel looked toward the entrance darkly. They are coming. Clara slowly approached the black circle on the floor. The moment her foot touched the edge, every candle inside the ruins ignited by themselves. Martha gasped. Symbols across the walls began glowing faintly red. Clara's body stiffened unnaturally. Her voice changed slightly. The door was never inside me. Ezekiel stepped closer cautiously. What do you mean? Clara turned toward him slowly. Fear filled her eyes. I was only the key. Suddenly, the ground beneath the ruins shook violently. Cracks spread across the stone floor. Deep beneath them, something massive moved underground. Martha backed away in terror. What now? Clara pointed toward the center of the black circle. It is waking up. The stone floor exploded upward. Dirt and broken rock blasted through the ruins. Martha screamed as a giant black shape rose slowly from beneath the earth. At first, it looked like smoke. Then bones appeared inside the darkness. A massive skeletal creature with antlers stretching toward the ruined ceiling. Its glowing white eyes burned like fire. The entire church trembled beneath its presence. Ezekiel dropped to his knees in horror. God help us! The creature lowered its enormous skull toward Clara. Thousands of whispers filled the air at once. Clara stood frozen while tears streamed down her face. Then the monster spoke using a voice made from countless human screams together. The gate opens tonight. Outside the ruined church, shadow figures gathered silently among the trees. Hundreds of glowing eyes surrounded the ruins completely. Martha realized with growing horror that Hollow Creek had never been the true target. The entire world beyond the forest was next. Clara looked up at the giant creature, trembling violently. Why me? The creature leaned closer until its burning eyes filled her entire vision. Because your blood belongs to both worlds. Then the ruined church doors slammed shut by themselves. The ruined church shook violently as the giant skeletal creature lowered its antlered skull toward Clara. The burning white light inside its eyes flooded the dark chamber while whispers filled every corner of the ruins. Martha covered her ears, trembling in terror. The voices sounded like thousands of dead souls crying out together from beneath the earth. Ezekiel remained frozen on his knees, staring at the monster with hopelessness carved across his face. Clara stood inside the glowing black circle, unable to move. Tears rolled down her cheeks while the dark veins beneath her skin spread farther across her arms. The creature's voice echoed again through the ruined church. The gate opens tonight. Outside, hundreds of shadow figures surrounded the ruins silently. Their glowing eyes waited between the trees like wolves watching wounded prey. Rain hammered the broken roof overhead while thunder shook the forest. Clara forced herself to speak despite fear crushing her chest. What are you? The creature slowly raised its head. Bone cracked loudly beneath its massive body. Before man learned fire, before kingdoms rose from dust, we existed between worlds. Martha felt sick listening to the voice. It sounded ancient beyond understanding. The creature continued. Your mother opened the path. Your birth unlocked the gate. Ezekiel lowered his head in shame. This is my fault. Clara turned toward him painfully. No, Mother chose this. Ezekiel looked at her with tears finally breaking free. I failed both of you. Martha stepped beside Clara protectively. Then help us stop it. The creature suddenly laughed. The sound shook the entire ruin. Dust fell from the ceiling while cracks spread farther across the stone floor. You cannot stop what has already begun. Outside, the shadows pressed closer around the church. Their whispers seeped through the walls like poison. Clara felt them clawing at her mind, pulling at something deep inside her soul. She grabbed her head in agony. Make them stop. The skeletal creature leaned closer. Join us willingly and the suffering ends. Martha shouted angrily. Do not listen. Clara looked desperately between them. I cannot fight it anymore. Ezekiel suddenly stood. Blood covered his clothes. His body trembled from exhaustion. But something inside him had changed. For the first time in 16 years, he looked at Clara not with fear, but love. True love. The kind he should have shown from the beginning. He stepped toward her carefully. Listen to me. Clara stared at him through tears. Ezekiel's voice cracked painfully. I spent your entire life believing pain could save the world. He looked down at the bloody mallet still clutched in his hands. But all I did was destroy my little girl. Clara's lips trembled. Ezekiel slowly dropped the mallet onto the stone floor. The heavy weapon echoed through the church loudly. I will never hurt you again. Martha watched silently while Clara broke into sobs. Years of fear and loneliness poured out of her all at once. Ezekiel stepped closer. Your mother once told me something before the darkness consumed her. He swallowed hard. She said evil survives through fear, but love confuses it. The creature released a furious growl. The walls shook again. Silence. Ezekiel ignored it. He looked directly into Clara's eyes. I was wrong about you. Clara whispered weakly. Father. It was the first time she had called him that without fear in years. Ezekiel's tears fell harder. You are not the doorway. You are not evil. You are my daughter. The black veins across Clara's skin suddenly stopped spreading. The creature noticed immediately. Its glowing eyes narrowed with rage. Outside, the shadow figures began shrieking violently. Clara gasped as warmth spread through her chest for the first time in years. Martha stared in shock. The whispers inside the church weakened slightly. The creature slammed one giant skeletal limb against the floor. Stone exploded outward. She belongs to us. Ezekiel stepped between the creature and Clara. No, the monster's voice thundered through the ruins. You cannot deny the blood. Ezekiel lifted his head proudly despite fear. Maybe not, but I can choose what kind of father I become before this ends. Martha suddenly noticed something glowing beneath the cracked floor inside the black circle. Symbols. Ancient symbols burning brighter now beneath Clara's feet. Clara looked down too. Strange memories flooded her mind instantly. She saw her mother years ago standing inside this same church while robed figures surrounded her. She heard ancient chants, saw blood covering the floor. Then she heard Eleanor crying, "Please forgive me." Clara stumbled backward, gasping. Mother regretted it. The creature released another furious roar. She belonged to us. Clara looked up sharply. No, you tricked her. The whispers around the church grew louder again, almost desperate now. Martha realized the creature was losing control. Clara stepped forward slowly despite her fear. You promised her power. Images continued flashing inside Clara's mind. Her mother crying alone at night, begging for the darkness to leave her child untouched, fighting against the evil consuming her soul. Clara suddenly understood the truth. Eleanor had not wanted to become a monster. She sacrificed herself trying to protect her daughter from the darkness she accidentally unleashed. Clara lifted her tear-filled eyes toward the creature. You used her. The giant skeletal figure leaned closer angrily. Human hearts are easy to corrupt. Clara's sadness slowly transformed into rage. Then you never understood her at all. The creature suddenly lunged downward toward Clara. Martha screamed. But before the monster could touch her, Ezekiel threw himself directly between them. Massive skeletal claws tore through his chest instantly. Blood sprayed across the glowing circle. Clara screamed in horror. Ezekiel collapsed into her arms, coughing blood. The creature pulled back, almost surprised. Martha rushed forward desperately. No. Ezekiel's breathing weakened rapidly. Clara held him tightly while sobbing uncontrollably. Please do not leave me. Ezekiel reached up weakly and touched her face gently. the same way a loving father should. "You were never the darkness," he whispered painfully. "You were the light fighting against it." Clara cried harder. "Father," Ezekiel smiled faintly despite blood pouring from his mouth. "I am so sorry." Then his body went still. Silence filled the ruined church for one heartbreaking moment. Clara stared down at her father's lifeless body while grief consumed her completely. The creature began laughing again. Love changes nothing, but something strange happened. Blood from Ezekiel's wound spread across the glowing symbols beneath Clara's feet. The entire black circle suddenly burst with blinding white light. The skeletal creature roared in pain. Martha shielded her eyes. Clara slowly stood holding her father's blood-stained hand. Then she understood the final truth. The doorway was never opened through pain. It was opened through blood-bound sacrifice. And now another sacrifice had been made. But this one carried love instead of fear. The glowing symbols changed color completely from black to brilliant white. Outside, the shadow figures began screaming horribly. The creature stumbled backward violently. "Impossible!" Clara stepped forward calmly now. The darkness inside her no longer controlled her. "You fed on fear for centuries," she whispered. "But you forgot something." The creature growled angrily. Clara's eyes filled with tears again as she looked at Ezekiel one final time. "Love is stronger." Suddenly, a wave of brilliant white energy exploded outward from Clara's body. The ruined church shook violently. Every shadow creature outside burst apart into black smoke instantly. The giant skeletal monster screamed with rage and agony as cracks spread across its enormous body. Martha watched in disbelief while the forest itself seemed to tremble. Clara lifted one shaking hand toward the creature. "Go back." The monster tried resisting, but the glowing light surrounding Clara grew stronger every second. The whispers turned into terrified screams. The creature's antlers shattered apart first, then its skull cracked down the center. Black smoke poured from every fracture. "This world belongs to the living," Clara whispered. With one final scream, the giant creature exploded into darkness. A massive shockwave tore through the forest. Trees bent violently. The ruined church collapsed around them. Martha grabbed Clara just before falling stones crushed them both. Then suddenly, everything became silent. The rain stopped. The whispers vanished completely. Morning sunlight slowly broke through the clouds above Hollow Creek for the first time in what felt like forever. Hours later, surviving villagers gathered near the edge of the forest. Smoke still rose from parts of the ruined village. Many people were dead, many homes destroyed, but the shadows were gone. The nightmare had finally ended. Martha sat beside Clara quietly beneath the morning sun. Clara stared toward the distant hills silently. Her bruises remained. Her pain remained. But the darkness inside her was gone. Martha gently asked, "What happens now?" Clara looked toward the sky. "Now I live." Martha smiled softly through tears. Far behind them, workers carried Ezekiel's body from the forest carefully. The villagers no longer looked at him with fear, only sadness. Because in the end, the man who became a monster trying to stop evil had finally remembered how to be a father. Clara closed her eyes as warm sunlight touched her face. For the first time in 16 years, she felt free. And somewhere deep within the quiet forest, a mother's voice whispered gently through the wind. "My daughter, Dark Lantern Stories thanks you for staying until the end of tonight's terrifying tale. If this story shocked you, touched your heart, or kept you on the edge of your seat, subscribe now and like this video for more dark and unforgettable stories. Tell us in the comments, did Ezekiel deserve forgiveness after everything he did? Or was it already too late? Also, tell us your city, country, and the time you finished watching this story. Until next time, keep your lantern burning through the darkness.